The year 1917. Russia was a land of immense size and deep inequality. World War I raged, bringing hardship and hunger to ordinary Russians. The Tsar, Nicholas II, seemed distant and uncaring. He clung to autocratic rule, resisting calls for change. His government was weak and unpopular. People had lost faith in the old order. In February 1917, revolution erupted in the streets of Petrograd, formerly St. Petersburg. The February Revolution, as it became known, was spontaneous and chaotic. Workers went on strike. Soldiers refused to fire on protesters. The Tsar, facing overwhelming opposition, was forced to abdicate. A provisional government made up of liberals and moderate socialists took power. They promised democracy and reforms. However, the provisional government made a fatal mistake. It kept Russia in World War I. This decision proved deeply unpopular. War weariness and discontent grew. Into this vacuum stepped a radical group, the Bolsheviks, led by the charismatic Vladimir Lenin. Lenin, exiled for years, returned to Russia with a simple but powerful message: peace, land, bread. The Bolsheviks promised an end to the war. They pledged to give land to the peasants and factories to the workers. Their message resonated with the exhausted and hungry masses. The stage was set for another revolution, one far more radical than the first. In October 1917, November according to the Western calendar, the Bolsheviks seized power. They stormed key government buildings in Petrograd, including the Winter Palace, the seat of the provisional government. This event, often romanticized as the storming of the Winter Palace, was actually a relatively bloodless affair. The provisional government, weak and indecisive, offered little resistance. The Bolsheviks, now in control, moved swiftly to consolidate power. They shut down opposition newspapers and banned rival political parties. They created a secret police force, the Cheka, to root out dissent. A brutal civil war erupted, pitting the Red Army of the Bolsheviks against the White Army, a loose coalition of anti-Bolshevik forces. The Russian Civil War was a complex and bloody conflict, lasting from 1918 to 1922. It was fought on multiple fronts, with foreign powers intervening on behalf of the White Army. The Bolsheviks, despite facing overwhelming odds, emerged victorious. They benefited from strong leadership, a united ideology, and control of Russia's industrial heartland. In 1922, out of the ashes of the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union was born. It was a new kind of state, a socialist state, based on the principles of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Lenin, the architect of this new order, envisioned a society without classes, where workers controlled the means of production. However, the Soviet Union he created would be shaped by his successor Joseph Stalin in ways he could never have imagined. After Lenin's death in 1924, a power struggle erupted within the Bolshevik Party. Joseph Stalin, a cunning and ruthless operator, emerged victorious. Under Stalin, the Soviet Union underwent a period of rapid industrialization and forced collectivization. Stalin's goal was to transform the Soviet Union from a backward agrarian society into a modern industrial power. To achieve this, he implemented a series of 5-year plans. These plans set ambitious targets for industrial production. Farmers were forced off their land and into collective farms. The goal was to increase agricultural output and free up labor for factories. However, collectivization proved disastrous. It led to widespread famine and resistance from peasants. Stalin's paranoia also led to the Great Purge of the 1930s. Millions of people, including many loyal communists, were arrested, executed, or sent to labor camps known as gulags. Stalin saw enemies everywhere. He used the purges to eliminate anyone he perceived as a threat to his power. The Great Purge had a devastating impact on Soviet society. It decimated the ranks of the Communist Party, the military, and the intelligentsia. It created a climate of fear and suspicion. Stalin's reign of terror left an indelible mark on the Soviet Union, shaping its political culture for decades to come. In 1939, the world watched in horror as Nazi Germany, under Adolf Hitler, unleashed war in Europe. The Soviet Union, initially allied with Germany through the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, found itself invaded in June 1941. Operation Barbarossa, as the invasion was codenamed, caught Stalin by surprise. He had ignored warnings from his own intelligence services. The German invasion, launched with lightning speed and brutality, aimed to conquer the Soviet Union and enslave its people. The Nazis considered Slavs to be racially inferior. They planned to exterminate or enslave much of the Soviet population. The Soviet people, facing an existential threat, rallied to defend their homeland. The Great Patriotic War, as it is known in Russia, was a titanic struggle. It was a war of ideologies, a clash between communism and Nazism. It was also a war of unimaginable brutality. The Eastern Front, as it became known, was the deadliest theater of World War II, claiming the lives of millions of soldiers and civilians. Despite suffering staggering losses, the Soviet Union emerged victorious. The Red Army, after years of bitter fighting, pushed the German invaders back to Berlin. The Soviet victory came at a tremendous cost. Millions lay dead. Cities and industries lay in ruins. But the Soviet Union had proven its resilience. It had defeated the Nazi war machine. It had emerged as a superpower. Section 5. Cold War Confrontation, a Divided World. The ashes of World War II gave rise to a new global order, one dominated by two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. These two nations, once allies against Nazi Germany, now faced each other across a divided Europe. The Cold War, as this rivalry became known, was a period of intense ideological conflict, military buildup, and proxy wars. The United States, a capitalist democracy, and the Soviet Union, a communist state, offered competing visions for the future. The U.S. sought to contain the spread of communism. The Soviet Union aimed to expand its influence and promote socialist revolutions worldwide. Both sides possessed nuclear weapons, raising the specter of a catastrophic conflict that could destroy humanity. The Cold War played out on multiple fronts: diplomatic, economic, and ideological. Europe, divided by the Iron Curtain, became the central arena of this confrontation. NATO, a military alliance led by the US, faced off against the Warsaw Pact, a Soviet-led bloc of Eastern European nations. Both sides maintained large standing armies, developed increasingly sophisticated weapon systems, and engaged in a dangerous game of brinkmanship. Section 6. Sputnik and Beyond. The Race to Space. In October 1957, the world watched in awe as the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite, into orbit. This event, a triumph of Soviet science and engineering, shocked the United States. It sparked a technological competition known as the space race. Sputnik, a small beeping sphere, represented a major propaganda victory for the Soviet Union. It demonstrated Soviet technological prowess to the world. The United States, determined to catch up, poured resources into its own space program, NASA. The space race became a key front in the Cold War, a symbolic contest for global prestige and technological superiority. Both sides achieved remarkable feats of engineering and human daring. Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space in 1961, another major coup for the Soviet Union. The United States, however, ultimately won the race to the moon, landing astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin on the lunar surface in 1969. The space race had a profound impact on both nations. It spurred scientific innovation, technological advancements, and educational reforms. It also captured the imagination of people around the world, inspiring generations to dream of exploring the cosmos. Section 7. Cracks in the facade, seeds of Soviet decline. Beneath the surface of Soviet superpower status, deep cracks were appearing. The Soviet economy, hampered by central planning and a lack of innovation, began to stagnate. Consumer goods were scarce. The quality of life for ordinary citizens lagged behind that of the West. The Soviet system, designed to control and repress, proved increasingly ineffective in an era of globalization and information technology. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979, aimed at propping up a communist regime, proved to be a costly blunder. The Afghan Mujahideen, supported by the United States and other Western powers, waged a fierce guerrilla war against the Soviet forces. The Afghan war drained the Soviet treasury, demoralized its military, and exposed the limits of Soviet power. Within the Soviet Union itself, calls for reform were growing louder. Dissidents, risking arrest and imprisonment, spoke out against political repression and demanded greater freedoms. Nationalist movements within the Soviet republics, long suppressed by Moscow, began to re-emerge. The Soviet Union, once a monolith, was showing signs of strain. Section 8. Gorbachev and the Fall: A Superpower Crumbles. In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev came to power in the Soviet Union. Gorbachev, a relatively young and energetic leader, recognized the need for change. He introduced a series of reforms known as glasnost, or openness, and perestroika, or restructuring. Glasnost aimed to increase transparency and freedom of expression. Perestroika sought to revitalize the Soviet economy through decentralization and limited market reforms. Gorbachev's reforms, while well-intentioned, unleashed forces he could not control. Glasnost led to an outpouring of criticism of the Soviet system, exposing decades of corruption and mismanagement. Perestroika, rather than revitalizing the economy, exacerbated existing problems. Nationalist movements within the Soviet republics gained momentum, demanding greater autonomy or outright independence. In 1989, the Berlin Wall, a potent symbol of Cold War division, fell. Communist regimes across Eastern Europe collapsed, swept away by popular uprisings. The Soviet Union, weakened by internal problems and facing a changing geopolitical landscape, could no longer maintain its grip on its satellite states. On December 25, 1991, the Soviet flag flew over the Kremlin for the last time. The Soviet Union, after more than 7 decades of existence, ceased to be.